Hello, this is Mike at Gamefromscratch, and welcome to a slightly belated This Week in Game Dev, Week 12. I'm one day late on this one. I apologize. I normally get these out on the weekends. Something came up, a little occupied, so we're coming at you one day late. Anyways, this week in Game Dev is a recap of the major stories that happened in the world of game development. Now let's jump right in. As always, all of the stories I mentioned today will be linked down below if you want to read more details. They are available. So let's get going. First off is Wave Engine released version 2.05. 2.0.5, sorry. It's a C# based 3D/2D WYSIWYG game editor along the lines of Unity, much newer though. Major changes to this release has got to be 64-bit support, but on top of that, they reworked the viewport. It used to be Virtual Screen Manager, and now have Viewport Manager, which allows you to do per-scene configurations for view settings. Nice change there, but the biggest one's obviously 64-bit edition. So that's Wave Engine 2.0.5. Another C# game engine saw a release this week. That was Shiva Engine saw released 2 Beta 5. Now, Shiva Engine is along the same lines. It's a visual-based, C#-powered game engine. It's been around for a while, but the weird thing is last year they were quite quiet. There weren't any major releases right up until about the end of last year. And then now, just 2 months later, we have another release. So that update schedule is definitely nice to see. Now, the biggest additions in this release were a pair of new modules. One was for fonts, and the other one was for HUD, or head-up display. And then a bunch of engine fixes, etc. So that's Shiva Engine. Next up is Corona Labs. They've been in the news a lot lately. Corona Labs was recently purchased by Perk. Corona obviously makes the Corona SDK, which is a Lua-based 2D game development system for cross-platform. Been used for a number of very successful 2D games, actually. But they just released a very intensive sample called Corona Cannon, which is along the lines of Angry Birds. But on top of being, a better code sample, it's actually done in modern code practices. It's not your typical sample. It's actually a full-fledged application written in a proper style. So if you're looking at learning to use Corona, this definitely is an entry point to it. It's nice to see this nice major sample being added. Now, Unity, of course, had their release, their weekly release. Not a ton there. New functionality was Correspond 2016's TV fonts and remote control. I don't even know what that means, to be honest. But it was mostly a fixed release. Nothing really special there, but definitely a bunch of new releases, new bug fixes. I believe the 5.2 release has been pretty buggy, so it's nice to see a bunch of new fixes coming down the pipeline for them. And again, I really like this fast release schedule where we're generally seeing a new release from Unity and Unreal every week. Now, on that topic, from Unreal, we heard nothing this week, actually. There was no patch. There was, however, VR support was added to Unreal. And this is interesting. This is not VR support probably as you are expecting. This is not that they added support for VR like the Samsung Gear VR or the Oculus Rift or HTC Vive or anything like that. They've actually added support to the engine. So you're going to be able to author your content using their 3D controllers, so the Vive controller or the Oculus controller, to manipulate and create your 3D world. It'd be interesting to see how this turns out. Personally, I don't know that it's going to be any more than a gimmick because I find VR uncomfortable after about an hour or so. So I couldn't picture spending my entire day working in VR, but I do see how it definitely would be useful for a level designer wanting to get in and really play with their tools. If you want, there's, I believe, a video linked that shows exactly what they're going for, but it is a VR layer on top of the Unreal Engine user interface, so you can create games using VR. Interesting concept, even if it doesn't end up working out. Next up, Firefox OS. This one's tangential to game development for sure, because not a lot of games were actually made for Firefox OS, but Mozilla basically has been working on an operating system since 2011 for bringing... It started basically as a small kernel that booted up into Gecko. Now, Gecko is the rendering engine behind Mozilla or Firefox web browser. And so the idea basically is they had this web browser-powered operating system, very similar in scope and functionality to Google's Chrome. And they just put a bullet in it. So Firefox OS is no more. Now, my understanding is, from a comment, that a few of the... think it was Samsung, but I might be wrong, was actually using it for Panasonic was using it to power their web TVs. So they might go on in that way. And Firefox says that they're going to be working and focusing the OS development on the Internet of Things, our next big buzzword. The IoT is basically a funky way of saying devices that talk to each other. But it is the next big thing, and Mozilla is going to be focusing on that. But there is no more Firefox OS, so I would not build games for it because it ain't happening. Next up, Atomic Game Engine, just released their basically the roadmap for 2016, the stuff that they're going to be working on. It's nice to see Oculus Rift support got in there. Updated user experience, documentation, and tutorials are always definitely a good thing. Coincidentally, I have a closer look at for this particular engine, so if you do want to learn more, give a look there. But it's nice to see have some transparency into where an engine you're working with is going. And then finally, BDX was released. Now, I've also done a really in-depth tutorial. It wasn't a closer look, but it was an in-depth tutorial on working with BDX. And BDX is a very neat concept. Basically, it is a 3D engine built inside of Blender using libgdx. So you actually can write your game code in Java, in libgdx, inside of Blender, but then take advantage of all of Blender's functionalities. Things like your material properties, your physics properties, etc. will all be carried over to your game objects. So it's very nice and tightly integrated within Blender. So if you like Blender and you like libgdx and you're making a 3D game, definitely give BDX a shot. As I said, 0.2.3 was just released. And I do have a tutorial linked right here. So if you want more of an idea of what's going on, that is definitely available to you. So that is it. That is last week in game development. Hope that was useful. See you next week. Goodbye.